So my name is Carrie, Cari. I go by Carrie or Kari, it doesn't matter. I was born in San Francisco, California. I'm 60 years old. And I spent my life growing up in a small town called Stockton, California, which is sort of part farming and quite diverse, actually. And then when I was 18, I was an actress all growing up. When I was 18, I went to art school. And I realized while I was at art school, honestly, I had my first anxiety attack in art school and got really freaked out. And so I left and I went back home for a little while and had more and more anxiety and a lot more partying. It was the 80s. And then decided to go back and study journalism and marketing. And I went into that field. I was in advertising agencies for almost 18 years and a total time in the corporate world of 30 years. Now, here's what gets a little interesting. When I was 15, I had a very amazing high school teacher named Dr. Doki. And he had me read a few things. He had me read a book called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, a story actually by Tolstoy, if you know Tolstoy. And it was about a guy, a man who, and I'm remembering, like, I haven't really read it since high school. I think I've scanned it. I have it somewhere on my bookshelf. But it was a story about a guy who is basically living his life, living his big dream. And he goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, "You have 3 weeks to live." And the only person who really stays with him during his final 3 weeks was his nurse or his caretaker, who was a guy. And he kind of has these 3 weeks to really reflect on how he lived his life. And he realized that he'd been chasing money and he'd been chasing the capitalistic dream and that he was completely unhappy and that he hadn't lived his life right. And so here I am at 15. And, my life at that point had been, I wouldn't say largely driven, but we were sort of a successful family in a small town. And my dad was, committed to success. And I said, I'm never, ever going to live my life this way. Like, I have to choose a different path. It has to have more meaning. I don't want to die thinking that I just chased money and things. By the way, I'm not saying money and things are bad, which I'll get to in a different little segment here. But what I will say is that, I just knew that was never going to be enough. That when I laid down to die, whenever that was, and I literally thought this at 15 years old. Like, when I lay down to die, I don't want to have regrets and think that I just chased things and money and power and all that stuff. That was just my thing. And then he had me read Siddhartha, which is the story of the Buddha, like right after that, which was all about the Buddha. And so I had this blessed moment that became the second path of my life. So while I was going through and, taking care of myself, I mean, I had to work, I had to do something to survive. I was also rigorously studying Buddhism and started meditating, and it became my second path. And so to date, you might have heard this stat about me if you read anything. I've sat like almost 8,000 hours of silent retreat. I've been a very rigorous student of a lot of different paths, including yoga, but mostly Buddhist-based meditation, Zen, and something called Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dual teaching. And I sort of mash them up into my own thing. I use what made sense for me in my life as a way to now help coach and heal other people, particularly people who are in the workplace, because that's where a lot of our shit can come up. So, the retreat that I'm designing uses Buddhist practice, and it uses the practice of sitting in stillness, which is so incredibly important to connect with silence and stillness, because in that lives the magic. But also, it wasn't just that. I did a lot more than just Buddhist and Advaita Vedanta training. I did art therapy and movement therapy, and I did journaling and writing. And so I wanted to create a retreat where we would be taking from all the modalities that I myself used to really wake up. And what does that even mean? So let me tell you. I just know that prior to my practice, I had terrible, debilitating anxiety. I had a lot of health anxiety, a lot of panic disorder. I didn't know what else to do, and I wasn't going to go on medication because my mom had been a drug addict. It was a choice I made, no judgment. And So for me, sitting in meditation was the path, and it worked. And not only did it work, it didn't work because I was reliant on something else, which I'm all for managing your mental health through medication. I just didn't choose that. And what I found was that through this practice, which is somewhat rigorous and you have to be kind of dedicated to it. So some people just want to take a pill and be done with it. But I didn't want that. So I dedicated my life. And I think at the end of the day, Buddhism is about that in some ways. Like the core teaching is that to be human is to be in a suffering state at some point. Doesn't mean you're always suffering. It's kind of a misunderstood word, this word suffering. But that through that, that is sort of what trains you into becoming like human, peaceful, connected, to have equanimity, to have mudita, which is just spontaneous joy, to have compassion. And when we either turn away from it or we don't live into it as a practice, as a form of human practice, like for me, that is what it means to be human. And in order to do that, we need to stop. We need to stop our lives. We need to pause. Because if we keep doing, we're in the cycle, right? We're just in our day, in our hour, in our week, in our weekend. We're checking off the social events on the calendar. We're doing, we're working out. We're doing all the things we need to do. And it isn't really until we stop and pause that we can drop in and begin to understand this path, that there is a path to peace, to joy, to compassion,